Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Brad Newenswander, Deputy Commissioner, and want to welcome you to the April 3rd Lunchtime Hot Topics. We've got a pretty good agenda today. Starting out, Melissa and Cynthia are going to give you an update on dyslexia. There was a dyslexia task force put together earlier this year, and they came out with some recommendations for the state board, so they're going to walk you through some of those recommendations and some of the work ahead for us. Following that, Carrie Rogers is going to give you some updates on the dynamic learning map, the assessment for our 1% of students. And then Tate is going to give you some updates on some accommodations, some changes, some updates, how to go about that, along with some resources. And then he's going to follow up with some information on title services for non-public schools, something that we all need to be focusing on every year. After that, Amanda Peterson, our Director for Early Childhood, is going to give you some updates on some projects and things going on relative to early childhood. And then finally, Don Gifford has some information for the Civic Advocacy Award, how to apply for that, some of the details for that. So pretty good agenda for today. I also want to remind all of you that this summer we will be hosting again 2 Impact Institutes. The theme this year is Discover. The first one will be June 27th and 28th at Washburn University, and then there will be one in July the 17th and 18th, and that's going to be at Pratt Community College. So try to get one out west and one in the east. So we hope that you will encourage your staff. This is a great time during the summer for faculty and staff at all levels to come and get updated on the Kansas Can Vision, a lot of the strands, board outcomes, just some good teaching strategies. We'll be providing some things on personalized learning, how to engage your community, and a lot of really good breakouts, good 2 days to get staff reinvigorated and really plugged into some of the work going on across the state. So we encourage you to look at those. Registration is available on our website. Again, throughout any of this presentation or at any time, if you have questions, thoughts, updates you want, just send those to lunchtime@ksde.org so we can get a kind of a pulse of what your questions and thoughts are. From the state, we're just honored to be on this journey with you. We still believe and truly think that if we want to lead the world in the success of each student, we need to do things a little bit differently from what we've done in the past. We've been across the state a lot of great things going on, and we're just proud to be on this journey with you. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for these dyslexia updates. Melissa and I are going to walk you through the current updates from the Dyslexia Legislative Task Force, and if you have any questions, our contact information will be on these slides.
Okay, so the first slide is the International Dyslexia Association's definition of dyslexia. It is also the definition that the Kansas Legislative Task Force on Dyslexia has adopted as their definition of dyslexia as well. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurological in origin. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge.
Students with dyslexia have many signs and symptoms, but most usually dyslexia is identified as a word level decoding skill. Students with dyslexia have issues with spelling, word reading, and decoding. They typically have grapheme and phoneme mapping problems. In other words, they cannot distinguish between the spoken word and the written word. They have trouble with that distinguishing ability. Students with dyslexia do not read backwards, but they do have spelling and writing problems due to those typical problems with remembering letter patterns and words. Students with dyslexia should receive structured literacy as core instruction with their peers and be monitored closely for progress in reading progression.
The Kansas Legislative Task Force on Dyslexia was formed to advise and make recommendations to the governor, the legislature, and the State Board of Education regarding matters concerning the use of evidence-based practices for students with dyslexia. Specifically, the bill provides the task force's recommendations and resource materials shall research and recommend evidence-based reading practices to address dyslexia or characteristics of dyslexia for use by schools, to research and recommend high-quality pre-service and in-service professional development activities to address reading difficulties like dyslexia, including identification of dyslexia and effective reading interventions to be used in schools and within degree programs for teacher preparation such as education, reading, special education, and speech-language pathology and psychology. They're also tasked to study and examine current state and federal laws and rules on regulations, and the implementation of such laws and rules and regulations that affect students with dyslexia, and to identify valid and reliable screening and evaluation assessments and protocols that can be used and appropriate personnel to administer such assessments in order to identify children with reading difficulties such as dyslexia, or students that have characteristics of dyslexia, as part of an ongoing reading monitoring system, part of the multi-tiered systems of support, and also in child find for special education eligibility.
Finally, the conclusions and recommendations of the task force were largely structured around the subcommittee on pre-service and in-service professional development, screening and evaluation processes, and evidence-based reading practices.
So the first subgroup was the pre-service professional development, and their recommendations were that the Kansas State Board of Education should modify the educator preparation program standards to include the International Dyslexia Association's knowledge and practice standards for teachers of reading. The Kansas State Board of Education should require candidates for K-6 teaching licenses, English language arts endorsements, and reading specialist teaching licenses and special education teaching licenses to pass an examination of their knowledge of the science of reading. KSDE should study and approve a test or multiple tests to satisfy this requirement. And the legislature should provide funding to train College of Education professors who teach reading to become cognizant of the science of reading. Training should include conference participation, educational experiences, webinars, and relevant education materials.
For in-service professional development, the State Board of Ed should require school systems to provide evidence-based and consistent professional development opportunities that consist of training in the nature of dyslexia, an introduction in procedures to identify students who are struggling in reading, and an introduction to intervention strategies and procedures. The State Board should also encourage colleges of education in Kansas to develop a course of study with a specialization in dyslexia and dyslexia-like characteristics. This course should be geared towards a science of reading endorsement. English for speakers of other languages endorsements could be used as a model for this structure. This course of study should align with IDA knowledge and practice standards. This course of study should include practical experiences working with students with dyslexia or characteristics of dyslexia with appropriate supervision and leadership development skills such that the person who graduates with this endorsement can train other classroom teachers and reading specialists within their school district. The training for classroom teachers should be consistent with the IDA document Dyslexia in the Classroom, What Every Teacher Needs to Know, And finally, the legislature should provide funding for school districts to train appropriate staff on dyslexia and recognizing dyslexia and the use of screening, diagnostic, and progress monitoring tools that are sensitive to the characteristics of dyslexia.
The subgroup for screening and evaluation process had the following recommendations. The Kansas State Board of Education should require every accredited school district to screen and identify students at risk of dyslexia or demonstrating the characteristics of dyslexia. The state board should amend the Kansas education system's accreditation model to require districts to implement a rigorous tiered system of support subject to external review. KSDE should develop and provide to school districts criteria for vetting and approving tools and materials for screening and assessing students for characteristics of dyslexia. And finally, the legislature should provide additional funding to districts for the purpose of requiring screening, diagnostic, and progress monitoring tools that are sensitive to the characteristics of dyslexia. KSDE should provide recommendations to districts on appropriate screening, diagnostic, and progress monitoring tools.
Evidence-based reading practices were the final subgroup of this committee. The State Board of Education should require each accredited school district to utilize structured literacy as the evidence-based approach to teaching literacy skills. They recommend that we teach this to all students and promote early intervention for students with characteristics of dyslexia. The Kansas State Board of Education should utilize the components of structured literacy checklist to evaluate structured literacy programs for accreditation purposes. The State Board should ensure that school districts are made aware of information concerning structured literacy training and information currently available from the Technical Assistance System Network, or TASN. KSDE should direct the creation of a dyslexia handbook for the use of schools in Kansas. The creation of the handbook should involve input from a broad array of stakeholders. And finally, the Kansas State Board of Education should identify a dyslexia coordinator within the Kansas State Department of Education.
And finally, some other recommendations were that the task force be continued, that the legislators should appoint the task force to meet once per year for 3 years to monitor progress of implementation of the recommendations. The reappointed task force should also include the same members that were on the task force and include the consulting conferees participating in the November 28th and January 10th meetings of the task force. They recommend that the dyslexia definition be the definition referred to in our second slide, which is the definition of dyslexia from the International Dyslexia Association. There is no proposed legislation at this time. And the next steps recommended is that the State Board of Education will take action to receive the report at its February meeting and task KSDE staff with determining what is needed to fulfill these recommendations. KSDE will then present these findings to the State Board for action as quickly as possible.
And this next slide are resources for your information. If you click on these links, you'll be able to access the Kansas State Department of Education Dyslexia Resources and the Kansas Special Education Process Handbook, which references dyslexia.
There's also additional resources on the KSDE TASN page, such as the MTSS project. There's also some recommendations for structured literacy that you can use and training opportunities. Resources at the National Center for Learning Disabilities, the Dyslexia Resource Center, LD Online, the International Dyslexia Association, and then a link to the Kansas Special Education Regulations.
And finally, if you are interested in learning more about the science of reading, I am Cindy Haddocky, and I am the Elementary Education Program Consultant for Kansas State Department of Education, and I offer a professional development called the Science of Reading, Phonemic Awareness and Phonics. It will be held in Lawrence on Thursday, February 28th at Greenbush, and if you're interested in enrolling for that course, please contact Greenbush and they'll be happy to get you enrolled in that, or contact me here at the State Department for more information. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Rogers, and I am a education program consultant on the Special Education and Title Services team, and I am going to go over some updates as far as next year as we transition to the updated Dynamic Learning Maps alternate assessment. And this information is being shared from Dynamic Learning Maps. The basis of the current DLM assessment that we've been using for the last 4 years is that there's 2 unique testing windows, each with unique requirements. One instructionally embedded assessment window, which is our current fall and winter window put together, in which teachers create instructional plans, select essential elements, and decide the linkage level, and then provide instruction and schedule assessments. There is also one spring window in which the system selects the essential elements and linkage level, and the teachers can set the schedule. The basis for the updated DLM assessment is that we will have 2 equally long windows spanning the entire school year, where the teacher creates instructional plans, selects essential elements, and decides the linkage level, and then provides instruction and schedules assessments. Both windows are functionally identical in approach and philosophy to the current instructionally embedded assessment window. The key benefits of the updated DLM alternate assessments: when students are assessed on the same essential elements in both windows, educators see an increased precision of measurement. When students are assessed on the full blueprint in each window, they have more opportunities to demonstrate what they know and can do. The comparison of the current to the updated DLM alternate assessment. What is going to stay the same? The blueprint coverage requirements stay the same. The scoring model stays the same. All student responses from the entire year are included in the summative reporting. The individual student score reports will continue to be the same format as they have been with the current DLM alternate assessments. What's the main difference? There will now be 2 instructionally embedded assessment windows instead of 1. The spring window is now another instructionally embedded window. The 2 windows are about the same length, and the entire blueprint is covered in each window. Comparing the number of testlets, there is a small increase in the number of testlets when covering all blueprint requirements in each window. With that, there is a small increase in the total testing time spread across the 2 windows. The science assessments in 2019-2020 will not be changing. Science testlet administration is highly recommended during the fall window, but optional. Teachers choose the science essential elements, linkage levels, and schedule the assessments. The science testlet administration is required in the spring window. During that window, the system will select the essential elements and linkage level. 9 testlets will be administered, and test administrators choose the schedule. Data management for the updated DLM alternate assessments. The data management requirements are about the same as previous instructionally embedded assessment windows. The opening date of the fall window is earlier than previous fall windows. The 2019 fall instructionally embedded assessment window. Before students' instructional plans can be created, student data must be uploaded in Educator Portal by September 9th of 2019. The required test administrator training must be completed, the first contact survey must be completed and submitted, and the personal needs and preferences, or P&P, profile settings must be selected. During the 2020 spring window, any new students to the district must be enrolled and rostered, the first contact survey submitted, and the P&P profile settings selected. In the spring window, the teacher must create an instructional plan, selecting the essential elements and linkage level. No other data management needs are required for this window. Test monitoring. Several reports and extracts are available to help district staff monitor instruction and testing progress. A new report will help teachers and district staff monitor progress. Thank you. If you have any questions as far as the DLM or with these changes, I do have a more detailed PowerPoint I am able to share with you. My contact information is listed, and for teachers that work with the students that take the dynamic learning maps, I do have a webinar, a DLM webinar on April 9th, where I will be going into detail about the changes for next year. Thank you.
We would like to remind districts the importance of accommodations for all students. Accommodations that are provided to students during the regular classroom instruction and classroom tests enable students to show what they know. When students take the state assessment, it is also vital that they continue to receive the accommodations they are receiving on a regular basis for instruction. The Kansas State Department of Education is currently looking at data that is indicating a significant decrease in the number of students receiving accommodations on state assessments. When students are given the necessary tools, they are able to show what they know and can do. These tools should not be taken away just for district level and state level assessments. If you have any more questions about accommodations, please contact Carrie Rogers. Her email address is crogers@ksde.org, and her phone number is 785-296-0916. Today we're going to discuss title services in our non-public schools. We have approximately 72 districts in the state of Kansas which also serve our private schools with services under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or ESEA. This was most recently reauthorized in 2015 under the Every Student Succeeds Act, and it requires our local education agencies or school districts to make sure that they are providing the equitable participation of private school students, teachers, and in some cases parental involvement for family members, along with other educational personnel. So today we're going to focus on some of the main things that we have to work with our school districts and our private schools in serving these students and teachers. The equitable service provisions in ESEA are found in two different areas of the law. For Title I, these are found in the Title I Part A and fall in Section 1117 of the Every Student Succeeds Act. The rest of the titles, which we'll go into more detail on the next slide, covers Titles 2 through 8, and they're in Sections 8501 through 8504 of Title 8 of the Uniform Provisions. These programs include the following: Title I Part C, the Migrant Education Program. Title II Part A, our Preparing, Training, and Recruiting. A lot of times we hear of this as our Professional Development Program. Our Title III Program, Part A, Language Instruction for our English learners. Title IV Part A, which this was also new with the Every Student Succeeds Act, our Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grants. And this also covers Title IV Part B, our 21st Century Community Learning Centers, which is a competitive grant. So as we talk about our equitable services, we're just going to go over a few of the main requirements in ESSA for our school districts to do. The first one, and probably most important, is to continually be engaging in timely and meaningful consultation with our private school officials. We encourage that this time of year, end of March, first part of April, is when our public schools reach out to the private schools in their catchment area and start discussing plans for the next year. This is very important to take care of our consultation early so we have plans in place prior to the following school year. So when school starts for the public school students and those students are receiving title services, our students at the private school will also be receiving the title services at the same time. The second bullet on here talks about that students and teachers in our private schools should have an opportunity to participate in activities that are equivalent to the opportunities provided that their public school counterparts. The key is they're equivalent. Does not have to mean they're the same activities, both for students and teachers, but it could be. If the needs of the students in the private school are similar to those needs of the public school students, those could be the same type of programs. The same for teachers. If both teachers in the public and private school are needing the same type of professional development provided for them, we can provide the same. But in many cases, the needs of the students and the teachers in the private schools are different. And in those are the places we need to work with, meeting the needs of those teachers and students. One of the keys to being able to do this is to assess, address, and evaluate the needs of the private school students and teachers. The public school needs to be working with our administration of our private schools to help determine what the needs are based on the amount of funding available for the services. So we want to get the biggest bang for our buck and make sure we're providing the services that our most needy students in our private school need. And the benefits and services must meet those needs. It's just not what the public school chooses to do, but we need to be making sure we're meeting the needs of the teachers and the students that are being served in the private school. And then one of the keys is spending an equal amount of funds per student to provide services. And KSDE has this all set up through the LCP and how we collect the rest of our data to guarantee that this happens. And this is not a requirement the district has to do, as KSDE does this for the districts. So when the preliminary allocations go out, there will be preliminary allocations for titles 2, 3, and 4A, which will show the preliminary allocations for both the public and the private schools. And then based on the Title I and district level information on student counts for both the public and private schools, when we see the preliminary allocations, our schools can make good estimates of what the funding will be for the private schools. The final amount of Title I funding for the private schools is determined when our school districts do the LCP application in August and early September. However, going into that, the school district should have a general idea on approximately how much money will go toward Equitable Services and Title I. Like I mentioned before, for Titles 2, 3, and 4, KSD directly provides that to you. So with the preliminary numbers, you should have a good idea of what we should be consulting with. And one of the keys is we need to be planning ahead of time. As we do this video in late March and early April, this should be the time that districts and private schools are deciding on professional development and services for the current school year. Those should have been planned long in advance, and that's why we're talking about starting in spring, making the plans for the next year. We might need to make adjustments if the dollar amount comes in a little higher or lower than we expect, or if we provide services that end up not costing as much or maybe costing a little more. We need to be able to make those adjustments, but one of the keys is we need to have a plan in place going into the school year of how this is happening. So the way we do this and the way we plan with our private school counterparts is called through consultation. And there's two keys to consultation. The first is communication. We need to make sure that we are communicating in person, on the phone, and through email with our private school counterparts. The key is at least once a year, if not multiple times, we should meet with our private schools in person to go through the whole consultation process. And it's just easier to set up those relationships when we meet in person, so when there are questions or concerns, they can be dealt with professionally. So these in person helps us plan. And then during the school year for check-ins, or if we need to make small changes or have double check on certain things, that's when phone calls and emails are very appropriate. You know, we don't have to meet in person for every little detail, but if we can do that once, twice, or possibly even 3 times a year, depending on the situation, it's going to be very helpful working out potential issues that might occur. If we do a lot of planning, we're going to have fewer issues and maybe just need to make a few adjustments during the school years as potential costs change, or if other needs arise that were not planned upon in the original consultation. The second part of consultation that is so important is developing those relationships. We need to be working with our private schools to develop those positive relationships that help us do in those planning. And as we talk about in-person meetings, a lot of times, especially that first one in the spring for our larger districts, we might be meeting with multiple schools at one time. So then setting up follow-ups that maybe one-on-one in person would be helpful. Or in our smaller districts, you know, those one-on-one meetings could be very helpful. A lot of times we encourage people to meet maybe 3 times a year, once at the public school, once at the private school, and maybe once at a neutral site. But it's always good to expose our private school constituents to our public schools and have our public school staff become aware of what the private schools are like and what their needs are in the building. So we really push, it's all about developing good, positive, working relationships. So what needs to be discussed during consultation? And this graphic comes from the United States Department of Ed and some of their technical assistance on working with consultation. They put this out shortly after 2015's passage of the Every Student Succeeds Act. And the key is, it shows in the middle that timely and meaningful consultation should be something that continues throughout the implementation and assessment of the services. So it should be going on year-round. There's not one stopping point. And that's why we encourage March and April to be the start. And then as we're getting ready to go back to school in August, confirm everything, get services going. And hopefully that way, come January and February, all of the expenditures are planned for and we're not making last-minute decisions. Because the closer we get to the end of the year, we run into timelines with fiscal year, accountability rules for different districts in the state, and policies they have to abide by. So we really want to have those planning in place so we're not really rushing at the end of the year, just making sure we're spending money appropriately. So on the left side of the graphic, you see 7 items in blue. These are things that should be occurring during consultation and were previously required under the No Child Left Behind Act. And we should be talking about and discussing the needs of the private school students and the teachers, how, when decisions are going to be made, and where the services being provided will be provided, the amount of funds available for services, and when we're meeting initially in the spring, we're going to be talking about preliminary allocations. They could change. We should be back on a good timeline this year, like we mentioned before, probably late March, early April, we'll have preliminary allocations. The size and the scope of the services, what services are going to be offered, how and where they're going to be delivered. We have a couple districts that use third-party providers to provide those services for our private schools, so we've got to make sure we have that in place and have had those discussions. And then also we need to discuss how are we going to assess the quality of the services. This needs to be determined during consultation and then followed up during the school year to make sure that we're assessing the services being provided to the private school students and teachers. Another thing we also want to remind people that, because it's not directly stated in this chart, is if a district is looking to transfer their Title II or IV funds into another title program, we need to be discussing that with our private schools, how that could affect them, and listen to any concerns our private schools may have with the public schools transferring their money. However, the final decision on the transferability is left up to the district. They just need to let the private schools know this is going to happen. Then there were 4 new things that were specifically mentioned in the law that also have to be discussed during the consultation process. In many cases, this was already discussed prior, they just were not required. If the private schools are pooling their funds, this should be discussed as an option. Providing services directly or via another entity, so whether we're going to use the third-party providers, how we're going to determine those, or whether the school district's going to use their own staff to provide those services. How the amount of funding is determined. One of the advantages in Kansas is that is determined by the state of Kansas using the data we've been provided through the SO66 for numbers of students attending our private schools, and then on for Title I through the LCP application for our poverty students in our Title I catchment areas. And then the last part here is that requires written affirmation. And after the ESSA was passed, we added this to our sheet, but we're still receiving consultation forms without this part of the form initialed. So on the next slide, we have what we're talking about here with requires written affirmation. We've always had on the consultation form a signature placed for both the LEA designee and the private school designee. But slightly above that, above the programs that will be provided for Equitable Services, we have a short statement with a blank that needs to be initialed. And I'm going to read exactly what the form says. The private school official should initial here, and there's that blank to the left, if they agree that timely and meaningful consultation occurred before the local education agency made decisions that affected the participation of eligible private school children in the following title program services: Title 1A, Title 1C, Title 2A, Title 3, and Title 4A. When we receive consultation forms and they are not initialed, we need to go up and follow through with the private schools to make sure meaningful consultation did occur. If it did not, we will require the public schools to make sure they're working with their private school officials that timely and meaningful consultation is occurring. So when we receive these forms back to the private school ombudsman, we expect to see initials next to this line and then the signatures at the bottom of the page. And the 2019-2020 consultation forms are available on our Title Services for Non-Public Schools webpage on the KSDE website. This has been a quick overview of how our public schools should be serving our title programs in our non-public schools. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I'm Tate Tateman. I'm the Assistant Director on the Special Education and Title Services team at the Kansas State Department of Education. My phone number is 785-296-6714, and my email is ttoedman@ksd.org or ttateman@ksde.org. Thank you for all you do for the great students in the state of Kansas.
Hello everybody, this is Amanda Peterson here to share an update about early childhood in Kansas. Today, as we think about how we're achieving our goal of making sure that each kindergarten student enters at age 5 socially, emotionally, and academically prepared for success, I would bet that something that is top of mind for many of you is when you'll hear back regarding your early learning grant applications for the 2019-2020 school year. We are currently reviewing those grant applications for Kansas Parents as Teachers, the State Pre-K 4-Year-Old at Risk program, and the Kansas Preschool Pilot. And the total amount that's available and the mechanism that we have for distributing those funds is dependent upon the final budget and school finance plan that will ultimately be approved during the 2019 legislative session. Once that total amount available is determined, we'll submit our funding recommendations to the State Board of Education for approval, and subsequently we'll notify applicants of the status of their award. If you have any questions regarding this process, you may send those to earlylearning@ksde.org. In the interim, for this 2018-2019 school year, we're very close to being finished with our audits statewide that will allow us to make sure that we have allocated the maximum possible number of slots for the State Pre-K 4-Year-Old at Risk program. So thanks to all of you for the work that you've been doing to make sure that we have accurate counts of the number of at-risk 4-year-old and 3-year-old students who are served in each district. That's really helpful as we are preparing for the next year. We are also considering the process for Kansas Parents as Teachers reallocation for 2018-2019. Thank you for sharing the information back regarding the either amount of funding that you could use additionally or the amount of funding that you're not anticipating that we'll spend this year. We're similarly reviewing that data and we'll be in touch shortly regarding updated funding for the 2018-2019 school year. I'm sure all of you have also already marked your calendars for the 2019 Kindergarten Readiness Snapshot. Just like for this last school year, all kindergarten classrooms are required to administer both the ASQ3 and the ASQ SE2 between August 1st and September 20th of 2019. We have begun contacting districts to make sure that we have the correct credentials for program administrators who are registered in ASQ Online. As a reminder, program administrators are users who are able to assign teacher or provider login credentials to others. So we are reaching out to make sure that we have the correct information for the 2019-2020 school year, and also making sure that districts are prepared to engage families and really make sure that we can get the most out of this tool to make sure that we are working with parents and with families to get a good snapshot of their children's development right when they're beginning kindergarten. We've received many questions about whether or not it's possible to use the ASQ3 and the ASQ SE2 during kindergarten roundup or during some other initiatives in the spring. The required collection window is between August 1st and September 20th, 2019. So no matter what else you do, you will have to do a screening for students during that window. But if you would like to use the tool during the rest of the year to be able to connect with families, to be able to help them understand their child's development, to be able to use the tool in other ways, you're certainly able to do that. We would ask that you use the paper version for times that's not during that August 1st to September 20th window, since we do incur a cost at the state level for any screens that are entered into ASQ Online. If you'd like more information, including if you need to brush up on frequently asked questions or quick reference guides, the agesandstages.com/KS website has a host of information that you can use to get up to speed. We're working on putting together training opportunities for the Impact Institutes and other summer learning opportunities. And if you have any questions, you can feel welcome to email earlylearning@ksde.org. I also know that we've been visiting about the opportunity that we have to strengthen early childhood in Kansas in 2019. As a reminder, Kansas has received a federal planning grant that allows us to engage in strategic planning and needs assessing, and we've been able to really see the pace of this work pick up, and we'd anticipate that we'll see that continue in the following weeks and months. We right now are engaged in collecting as much data as we can that relates to the early childhood system in Kansas. We are also working with the Governor's Education Council, the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund, the State Interagency Coordinating Council, and many other groups to be able to pull together all of the exciting work that's happening to vision our future early childhood system in Kansas. If you'd like to stay up to date on this initiative, you can visit the Kansas Children's Cabinet website, which is displayed here on your screen. I'd also encourage you to keep a mental note that on April 11th, the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund will have their next meeting, and I'd anticipate that that meeting will shed a lot of light on some of the plans that we have and some of the exciting opportunities that are ahead for this year. We are also very close to finalizing dates for a tour to be able to really hear from Kansans and from communities about what we want and need from our early childhood system. We've identified the cities that you can see here on your screen as places where we'd like to visit, and if you don't see your community represented, certainly feel welcome to reach out. We are developing a community engagement session structure that will allow us to collect feedback and highlight the bright spots and areas of opportunity in communities across the state. And if you live in or around one of these communities and would like to be helpful, please do reach out to us and let us know so that we can make sure that you're very up to date on when these community engagement sessions are happening and on the ways that you can get involved. This is going to be a really collaborative effort, and we know that it's going to be a very busy summer as we collect all of this feedback and prepare to create that comprehensive early childhood strategic plan for the state of Kansas. Finally, if you'd like to stay connected with the early childhood team, I'd encourage you to join our early learning listserv and participate in our next 2 early learning webinars. You can also always feel welcome to send us an email. And as a preview, some of the other work that we're doing right now relates to developing a statewide rubric for kindergarten readiness that we can use for the Kansans Can Star recognition system. So we'll be sharing more about that on the webinar this Friday, and we'll be reaching out to be able to share more information about that in the weeks and months ahead. So thanks very much and have a wonderful Wednesday.
Good afternoon. My name is Don Gifford. I'm the coordinator of civic engagement here at KSDE, and I'm going to talk about how your school can become a Civic Advocacy Network Award winner. Civic Advocacy Network Award program was created by the State Board to encourage schools to build civic engagement opportunities for their students. The goal is to create real-world opportunities which could serve as transformational moments in the lives of our students, moving them from being civically involved to civically engaged. The criteria for being inducted into the Civic Advocacy Network are the 6 proven practices of effective civic learning created by the Education Commission of the States and endorsed by many civic education groups, including the Center for Civic Education. The application is currently open. The application is lengthy, so we recommend making a copy and saving it as a Word document, and then copy and paste when you have all of your responses ready for submission. I will walk you through the process of making the application. The form asks for 2 pieces of evidence of civic engagement programming in each of the 6 practices and a single response for family and community engagement. Schools will be scored with these 2 criteria in mind. The first, does this practice encourage true student engagement, or does it promote simply student involvement? The second criteria is what percentage of students participate in the program. The final question in each section gives schools the opportunity to provide anecdotes of your students' learning around civic engagement. This is your opportunity to give us a great story about the learning that is related to the program or practice that you are implementing. So you provide evidence for each of these 6 practices, and then you get one final chance to brag on your school and community by spotlighting a way you have successfully collaborated to bring civic engagement opportunities to your students. After you have collected all of your evidence, go back into the application, copy and paste your responses from your Word or Google Doc into the form, and submit. Applications will be scored by practice by teams of scorers who have expertise around the particular practice using rubrics similar to this one. Schools submit evidence of how they have created programs addressing each practice. The deadline for this submission is June 1st. Those applications will be scored by a panel on a scoring rubric. The higher the percentage of students engaged, the more points the school scored on the rubric. Each practice will be scored and those scores combined and the winners selected. Every school receives feedback from the scoring committee, similar to this one, on how they might improve their application. Winners are in the network for 3 years. They present at the Civic Engagement Conference, and after 3 years, they reapply with evidence that they have assisted other schools in improving civic engagement opportunities for their students. Last year, we awarded 8 schools with the Civic Advocacy Network Award. Complete High School, Derby Hills Elementary, Enders Community Service Magnet, Garden City High School, McPherson Middle School, Park Hill Elementary, Starside Elementary, and Susan B. Anthony Middle School. Some schools may be recognized for promising practice. There is additional recognitions for these schools who have outstanding programs that hold potential for other schools. These schools perhaps weren't strong enough in all categories to be included among the award winners, but are recognized for implementing promising practice. Those schools were Valley Heights High School, Florence Wilson Elementary, Merriam Park Elementary, and Seaman High School. Though these schools did not make the inaugural class, the scoring panel made note of promising practices. These promising practices could be modeled to support other schools as they try to improve their programs. If you have any questions about Civic Advocacy Network or KSDE Civic Engagement Initiative, please feel free to contact Jessica Noble or me, Don Gifford. Thanks so much for your time. Have a great afternoon.